Okay, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon muser today. Now, tonight, I'm going to be trying something a little daunting. In keeping with my series of overviews that I've been doing the last little while, I decided to finally quit postponing the overview that I had been threatening to do for Paizo's very cool Starfinder science fantasy role-playing game. And today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to give sort of at the time of recording, an idea for folks who may be on the fence about Starfinder, who may just be curious about it, or who may not give two shits about it, but want to, hear about a new role-playing game, to give you a sense of what Starfinder is, what's, what the products are that are available for it, and to structure that kind of, introduction, overview, and then a review. I'm going to structure this the same way that I do my other reviews, which is to say there's going to be, broadly speaking, 7 different sections. So the first, I want to talk about some general background for Starfinder, what it is, how it came about, and whatnot, and kind of situate it in the proper way. I mean, I think the proper way of understanding what Starfinder actually is, because when I first came to Starfinder, I actually came from the wrong, or I think not necessarily the wrong, but I came from a mistaken perspective, and that affected my initial impression of it. So I'm going to talk about that. Then I'm going to talk about what's the game about. I'm going to talk about what the core mechanic is, which will be fairly easy for this. I'm going to talk about what you play in the game. I'm going to talk about what you do in the game. I'm going to talk about what's in the core book, and then as well as some of the other supplements that are available for it. And then I'm going to talk about who this is for. So the ones that are probably going to be the most analytical are going to be those first and last kind of sections. But let's get to it. So first off, as general background, so Starfinder is the science fantasy role-playing game that was published a couple years back. I think it's 2 years old now, if I recall. Let's take a look at the copyright date in here. 2017, yeah. So this will be its second year of life. It's published by Paizo Publishing, so the publishers behind the Pathfinder role-playing game. And this was published before the second edition of Pathfinder was announced, and it was, well, I don't want to give too much of, it was basically intended to be sort of an outgrowth, from Pathfinder. And if you see what is in the Pathfinder second edition, some people have kind of thought of this as a, dry run for the Pathfinder second edition playtest, but I kind of want to take it out of that discussion. I'm going to talk about Pathfinder a little bit more as we go on, just for sake of reference. But it's best to not think of this as Pathfinder anymore, because it really is a different creature. Now, I mentioned that I kind of came at this from the wrong perspective, and initially. When this game came out, I had been running quite a bit of Mongoose Publishing's Traveller, which is a hard science fiction role-playing game. So when I got this thing, that's sort of what I compared it to. I was like, all right, well, what am I going to do with this game? What kind of sci-fi stories can I tell with this? And when I was looking at it that way, it was just not, I did not think it was a particularly good game. But that was because I was wrong about what the game was. Now, the way that I think, after running this for about 5, coming up on 6 months now, having owned this and read it since it first came out, and read the adventures that have come out for it, and the supplements that have come out for it, I've got a different understanding or different perspective on Starfinder. And that's kind of what I want to set as the initial way of talking about this game, so that hopefully you can see it from what I think is its intended, or see it for what it was intended to be. So I want to step back to a little further in gaming history too, and talk about Dungeons and Dragons. So Dungeons and Dragons, as of the the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, they included something called the Appendix N. And the Appendix N, and this could very well be those D&D historians out there, you may correct me if this was in the white box as well, but in the DMG for AD&D First Edition, there was a listing called Appendix N, and this was the influential material that that sort of led to the flavor of the creature that was Dungeons and Dragons. And the Appendix N has been referenced by a lot of more modern games as well, part of the old school Renaissance or the old school revival, and who have gone back to that and tried to, to either like play up certain aspects of the Appendix N. Things that were in the Appendix N were things like Robert E. Howard's Conan stories and his Solomon Kane stories, J.R.R. Tolkien, obviously, Clark Ashton Smith, Michael Moorcock, Jack Vance and the Dying Earth stories, and there's a bunch of other ones too that I'm not gonna go through the whole thing. But the thing is that Dungeons and Dragons is not any one of those source materials. If anyone has played D&D and tried to emulate one of those particular settings before, or one of those particular themes, you'll find that D&D has a hard time doing just one of those things without substantial changes. Running a strictly Conan game with D&D requires a lot of changes. Running a Middle Earth game and capturing that flavor likewise has challenges to it. And it sort of cuts across all of those things. And the reason that is because D&D is all of those things, as it takes inspiration from all of those things, but is its own thing. It's its own animal. There are aspects of what D&D has become or became at the point of AD&D and then kind of evolved as it went forward that transcended what its influences were. And that's the best way to think of Starfinder. As you go through and if you become familiar with the Starfinder material, the core mechanics are very, very recognizable as being D&D based or D20 based. But the actual game, the flavor that comes across in everything in this game, from the character classes to the races to the setting to the gear you get and stuff like that, it owes a debt to a lot of different inspirational things, including D&D style games and Pathfinder, but also other sci-fi role-playing games like Star Frontiers, like Traveler, and a myriad amount of science fiction stuff as well too. When you get to get familiar with the game, you can see elements of Star Wars in here, and you can see elements of Star Trek, and you can see elements of Firefly and Battlestar Galactica to a degree, as well as even some like cyberpunk stuff too. So there's a bit of like cyberpunk and there's a bit of Shadowrun for sure in this thing. And all of those things are all inspiration. And then what you end up with is a game that is uniquely its own thing. And within the world that this game creates, you can then create Starfinder versions of a bunch of different things. So knowing that that's the world, in the same way that like D&D over the course of its history was able to transcend being just a dungeon crawl game or a wilderness exploration game and murder hobos and whatnot, to really capture a bunch of different a bunch of different settings and flavors and styles of play that are still distinctly D&D, but have their own kind of vibe. Looking at my shelf here, I can see, Dark Sun is a very much more swords and sorcery feel for that. I've got some Dragonlance back there, which is a more romantic and kind of traditional, story. Ravenloft, Gothic horror. Birthright, which is like a Game of Thrones style, dynastic contest type stuff. And that's sort of what the way I think is the best way to understand and appreciate what Starfinder actually is. That's a little more of a high level, kind of a perspective. I can appreciate if what you just want to know is, what kind of classes you can play and stuff like that. But I think it's important to situate the perspective on this overview, so you can not see this as, well, how can I take this to run a Star Wars game, or how can I take this to run a low fantasy Travelers type game. That's going to require an awful lot of work, in the same way that D&D, to situate itself to just one of those thematic sources, is going to be a challenge. Instead, I think the way to appreciate Starfinder is, how do I steal stuff from every one of those ideas and drop it into Starfinder? Because you can do that. Because it is a conglomeration of all those different things, and it transcends that and becomes its own thing, its own setting, you can then add in ideas from other things. It's not a matter of taking this rule set or this game and doing other things. It's taking those ideas and plunking it into your Starfinder game. So that's sort of the perspective that I'm going to be using when I talk about Starfinder. I'm not going to be talking about it as a way of running a bunch of different things. It's not intended to be a toolbox kind of game. It's intended for you to play in the Starfinder universe, but that universe is vast, and you can find all sorts of different ways of playing, different sorts of adventurers, different sorts of adventure within that. So anyway, so that's what that's what the perspective that I'm going to be offering on this Starfinder game. So on a more nitty-gritty level, what Starfinder is a D20 based game in this that owes a lot mechanically to the Pathfinder version or the 3.5 or third edition version of Dungeons and Dragons. By that I mean, when you're creating your character, it is a combination of different elements of your character. You pick a race, which in a lot of games is called ancestry now. So you pick a specific race, you pick a specific class, and then you also pick something called a background. Is it called a background, or am I already fucking up the review? A theme, sorry, not a background, a theme. And a theme basically is very much like what a background is in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. So you have 3 different kind of tiers around which you're going to be situating your character idea: the race, the theme, and then your class as well. And so it's going to be very familiar to D20 style players. In addition, you have the standard, 6 attributes: strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. You have hit points, just like in most D20 role-playing games, but you also have something called stamina. And stamina is kind of like your cushion between just getting beaten up, having a dangerous encounter and getting kind of knocked around, and when you genuinely are hurt. Your stamina can be recovered as sort of a short rest kind of thing. So if you're familiar with 4th edition D&D or 5th edition D&D, you just need to take a moment to catch your breath. You can blow another resource you have called Resolve, and that allows you to recharge your stamina. You also recharge all your stamina when you sleep for an evening. Your hit points, though, reflects your actual injury. That's once you start dipping into your hit points, that's when things get really scary. And it's a lot harder. Your hit points heal in Starfinder very much the way they do in other D20 games, where it takes either magic or time. And so that's another thing. Damage, there's different types of damage that is modeled, like piercing and energy and fire and ice and whatever. Sonic is another, and that's very much a carryover from 5th edition. There is, what else? You use the traditional slate of dice in it. All task resolution in this game, be it saving throws or skill tests or attacks, is all going to be a D20. And the effect dice are generally going to be some smaller dice, so a D4, or D6, or D8, or D12, or whatever. It's a level-based game as well, so as you go through the adventures, you will be going up in level. But one way that this differs from the other, like the 3.5 or 3rd edition or Pathfinder games, is that there is parity with a lot of your tests. Difficulty numbers in tests are often keyed to the level of what you're contesting against. And if you're running a game that is sort of, quote unquote balanced, you're probably going to be running against difficulty numbers that sort of stay roughly the same. There are certain skill checks that will be fixed so that, like, as you go up in level, it's going to be a lot easier to do those things. But as you go up, when it's contested stuff, more often than not, so it's not just flat tests to try and picking a lock would be maybe contested. Things like knowing, like a knowledge check in Pathfinder, it would be in this one, it's I think is it called knowledge? Can't remember. Lore, maybe? Can't remember offhand. It's just a flat, it is knowledge. It's recall knowledge check. Those things have flat numbers. They're not scaled to the difficulty number, unless it's something about a monster, then it is keyed. So, because that would be kind of contested. So what it means is that, your characters both have an opportunity to get more badass as they go up, but the world is still a challenging place. And very similar to how D&D 5th edition kind of models the gaining in levels by increasing the amount of damage you do and increasing the amount of hit points you have, Starfinder does something similar to that. And but there is the base attack bonuses aren't fixed at a relatively narrow band the way they are in 5th edition. This is still like Pathfinder, where you're starting off, if you're a soldier class, you start off with a base attack bonus of +1. When you hit level 20, you're going to have +20. And then the different classes have different modifiers. Your skill, your saving throws, and things like that likewise go up. What else? Gear is a very, very important part of this game. And there is, I'm going to get into more detail about that as we go through the book, but gear is honestly closer to kind of like a video game loot shooter, where there's just tons and tons and tons of a variety of different kinds of gear, and it is all keyed to levels. So it's very similar to, say, the 4th edition D&D model, where your magic items have certain levels to them. Yeah, I've heard, I mean, I've seen online that people find that sometimes to be, it is too much of a gamified element to the game, because it requires you to sort of not look at that and just sort of ignore that. People in the fiction aren't aware that their rifle they're carrying is a level 15 sonic rifle, right? They're it's just got a specific name to it. But the thing is, and if you think of it just in the terms of a traditional kind of like RPG, you can't. I think the natural inclination is to think of it as like, well, I'm going to be having to kill people and take more and more powerful weapons. But the thing is that the one of the ways that the game gets around that is the crafting rules are pretty fucking easy in this. It's pretty easy to set up, not only to have an opportunity to craft, but also to just get that stuff put together. It's not like creating magic items in some versions of D&D where it is a really onerous endeavor. It's relatively easy to get on your ship, a crafting lab, and then just keep up to par with your stuff by crafting it. And I'm not going to talk about ways of hacking the game to sort of work your way around that, but it is a core component and core part of this game. And characters need to get more powerful stuff as they gain levels in order to stay competitive. But I think that it is very easy to just not look at that too hard, to not really be spending too much time focusing on that element of it, and just agree that, look, this is what's going to be happening over the course of play. We'll just, we're playing not a video game, we're playing a role-playing game. So that's just part and parcel of this particular game. And I think there are strengths to that approach as well that I'll talk about as we get along. But that's one significant way this differs as well, is that there are level-based gear. And that, for the most part, the stuff that has the most impact on tactical situations is your guns and your armor, or your weapons and your armor. It is sort of similar to 3rd or 3.5 or Pathfinder in terms of your amount of actions per round. They've made some simplifications in it, in particular multi-attacks. Multi-attacks are just a flat -4. If you want to shoot twice or attack twice or hit someone twice in a round, you take -4 to the attack. You can start doing that at first level. And because difficulty classes are often key to your level, that means it's a viable strategy right from the get-go. And as background, I suppose, as well too. So I've been running an ongoing campaign with Starfinder for about 5 months now. We play every 2 weeks for 3 hours, and my player characters have only gained 2 levels so far, and we're playing through one of the adventure paths that I'll talk about a little later, called Against the Aeon Throne. So I'm playing through one of their pre-made APs. Normally, I'm not as just a way of understanding my perspective on this. I normally don't really like running adventure paths. I find that I get bored, and I find them too restrictive, and I find often that they are. I feel like they are just a series of combat encounters. And I have not found that to be the case in this whatsoever. I found a great deal more freedom in that, in this particular adventure path, and I'll talk about why when we talk about the adventure paths. But yeah, but that's something that I've greatly enjoyed. And even though we've been playing for 5 months and the characters have only gained one level, we still have had a thoroughly thrilling and exciting space opera kind of experience. It's been really, really, really fun. So anyway, what other things do you need to know as just background for this? If you're coming at this from another fantasy D20 game like Pathfinder or Pathfinder or D&D, any of the iterations of D&D, magic in this is substantially less powerful. Spells cap out at, I believe, level 6, and the spells are just not as they're not as kind of like narrative breaking as what the spells in D&D can be. Again, like my characters have not, or my players have not got to the level. But even looking forward and designing characters further ahead, or starting and running a game at a higher level, the Magic users do not feel like they are operating in a whole different kind of superpowered world. And what that means is that it feels, the Magic and the Magic users definitely feel, they feel thematically capable, like they're contributing in magical and sorcerous ways, but they don't dominate the game. I feel like it doesn't break the more earthy feel that this particular game has. At most, what the players or spellcasters in Starfinder are not like 5th edition spellcasters, where they can just rely on their cantrips as the most effective kind of go-to combat thing without dipping into their spells. Spellcasters in Starfinder, they're going to carry weapons if they need to have a reliable, usable over and over again. They still have some spells that are pretty effective, but it's not like spellcasters in fantasy. And if you're coming into the game from that perspective, that's another thing to not be disappointed about. I know that initial reaction to the capabilities of the spellcasters in this was really negative. People were really shitty on the fact that, like, well, how come I can't get 9th level spells? This is ridiculous. I want to play a spellcaster. Who cares if I focus on just this stuff? And I think it's a smart design decision to keep you still definitely get to feel like a magical character, but it's not as fantastical as what it is in a fantasy RPG. Text still dominates here. What else do you need to know for the background here, I guess, or just sort of the general background? Maybe that's enough for the background for now. That's the game. Let's talk about what the game is about. So what the game is about is crews of basically adventurers, space adventurers. One of the ways that this game differs from other games is from other fantasy games or other D20 games, is that you have a ship. And the ship, at default, the way you're encouraged to play, the ship is a character in the game. And as the group gains levels, the ship will gain levels as well, and you'll be able to add more stuff to it. There are they call them tiers. They don't call them levels, but as you gain levels, you gain basically more like build points to customize your ship in more ways. And the other way that the game facilitates kind of group involvement in the ship is in ship combat. Ship combat in this is probably the most technical and crunchy kind of style of play. It reminds me a lot of the old BattleTech game in the sense that you're using hexes and you're moving stuff around and you have turn rates and stuff like that. But it does take time, but every character has something to do, something useful to contribute to the starship combat. And so everyone is involved and everyone has a stake in what's happening in their ship, even though you're all on the same ship. Further, the fact that it is so crunchy means that, it's not just hand-wavy kind of narrative stuff. And I don't necessarily mean that in a, the comparator that I think of, that I have the most familiarity with, is the narrative style of starship combat in the Star Wars game, in the Star Wars Fantasy Flight Star Wars games. It does a pretty good job of letting everyone have something to do in the game as well too, and it does move along at a pretty good clip. But what you end up losing in that is some of the meaningful tactical depth. Some people making significant decisions in their game, or the kind of tactical level decisions that board gamers really kind of like. And that really is what Starship Combat is like in this. It is very much a, moving hex by hex and turning your stuff. It sounds really boring, but my experience thus far has been that it's a ton of fun. It's very, very immersive. And because everybody has a stake in that, everyone's paying attention. It's not watching one combat-oriented character doing a bunch of cool shit and then, waiting for for the combat to be over. Everybody has a stake in that stuff, and it's cool. It's really, really fun. So because of that, anytime starship combat happens, and when you're building the ship, it involves the entire party, and that's a pretty cool way of structuring the game. you're playing this crew that is out trying to kind of make its way in the world. That's the default style of play. Each of the adventure paths kind of brings your character into those stories. And the reason I'm going to mention the adventure paths is because, like, that's just, I think, that's the best way to judge how the people at Paizo, the publishers, intend you to play the game. And every one of the adventure paths starts off with, your crew of whatever, of ne'er-do-wells or whatever, end up doing X. And it's a really great way. I mean, like, if you don't have to spend time trying to find an excuse to get the party together, we know that they're together at first level if you're starting at first level. And that's because, you've got this ship. So it's a good way to kind of inadvertently, encourage the players to start talking about their backstory and fit themselves together. So that's what the game's about, is, these crews of adventurers going out and kind of getting at adventures, hiring on with different corporations or organizations, or, getting swept up in galactic events or, transplanetary events or whatever your DM wants to do. I've talked about the core mechanics already, so I guess I'm skipping ahead in some of the sections here. What do you play in the game? Let's talk about that. So as I mentioned, there's different kind of 3 different tiers around, or pillars around, which you're going to be designing your character. The first one is your theme. And I will only go into fine detail about the themes that are in the core, or the options in the core rulebook. But as we go through the other supplements, I'll try and give you some ideas of just how much more there is, like how many more options are included in every single one of the supplements that you get. So the themes, or the character themes in the first one, here's the what the pages look like. This is the layout for all the Starfinder books, at least the core books, the supplements. Each of the adventure paths has a different kind of dressing to it, in the same way that the Pathfinder adventure paths have different dressings. The character themes in the core rulebook are, and remember, it's only one of the 3 tiers that'll make up your character, are Ace Pilot, Bounty Hunter, Icon, which is like a celebrity, Mercenary, Outlaw, Priest, Scholar, Spacefarer, Xenoseeker. And the difference between the 2 of them is Spacefarer is someone who goes out and just travels the space lanes. Xenoseeker is someone who specifically travels outside the default setting to go and meet new species and explore new kind of things. And then there's Themeless, where you can just, if none of those really fits with your concept for your character or your theme, you can pick that. And each of those themes contributes some of the stats or stat modifiers and abilities that make up your character. In particular, the themes set up sort of what your background abilities are. And there are absolutely no restrictions between mixing and matching of races and classes and themes. So any of these can work in whatever combo you want. And the nice thing is that because the modifiers from all these things are not huge, it's not like there's a clear suboptimal or a clear wrong choice in terms of what combo you want to do. In terms of the races, I'm going to go hold this up here so you can see. And I forgive me for not using a PDF for this. It's just that with the PDFs, I find it screws up the stream. So, well, here we go. There are androids, which are a very specific type of biohumanoid. They have difficulty with emotions, and let's give the illustration there. Yeah, and I think in the default setting in the Pact Worlds, they've only relatively recently, actually earned status, like as an actual sentient. There are humans. I suspect all our viewers are familiar with that particular class. And just like in other modern versions of D&D, humans have specific bonuses, so they're not a suboptimal choice or something like that. There's Kasathans, which are these kind of like nomadic, 4-armed, sort of mystic travelers. So they're pretty cool. There's the Lashuntas. The Lashuntas are from this world. So the Kasathans, I'll say, are from this enormous, basically colony ship called I think it's called the Yadari. I'll double check that as we go through this. But the Kasathans they came to the Pact world on this massive ship, guided by prophecy, expecting to settle this one planet called Akiton. Only when they arrived, they found Akiton was already occupied by a whole bunch of people. So after a little bit of talking back and forth, they decided to park the Adari in orbit in where one of the planets used to be, and then they became, participating members of the Pact Worlds. The Lashunta come from a verdant planet in the Pact Worlds called Castroval, which is kind of like a jungle planet full of dangerous creatures and other species like the remnants of the Elvish race and an insectoid creatures or insectoid race called the Fomorians. I can't remember. But anyway, the Lashuntas are that. They're all psychic, and they have two different subspecies that are either stockier and stronger, or taller and more I think charismatic. Oh, and smarter. So there's the short and dumb, or tall and smart. There are the Shirin, or these cool insectoid creatures that used to be part of this really like apocalyptic level intergalactic threat called the Swarm. It was so important that when we get further on, I'll introduce you to the Vesk. And they actually, the Swarm was such a threat that these two different intergalactic organizations, the Pact Worlds and the Veskarium, allied themselves to be able to defeat the Swarm. But one of the ways they defeated them was because of this mutant subspecies called the Shirin. The Swarm is, as you can imagine, a kind of insectoid hive mind kind of thing. And the Shirin developed their own sentience. They were kind of a mutant, and they were cast out from the Swarm and then made their lives for themselves in the Pact Worlds. And then there's the Vesk, the big reptilian creatures that came from a intergalactic organization called the Veskarium. And they're kind of like your ersatz, Klingons type, battle, whatever race. And the Veskarium originally invaded the Pact Worlds, and they fought a war against each other. And it was only really the threat of the Swarm that forced the two of them into an alliance. But many Vesk since that time have made homes in the Pact Worlds. So they're very common there. And the final one are the awesome Yasaki. And the Yasaki, or Ratmen. And these are terrific. It's basically like teeny tiny little Ratmen. If you think of the Skaven from Warhammer Fantasy, they're very, actually, that's not really a good comparator. Apart from them looking like that, they're otherwise just these clever little mechanically inclined rat guys. And they are both adorable and awesome. And that's your basics, your starting classes, races. So you can choose from those things. And as you'll see, there's also just a shit ton of other choices that have come up since the core book came out. The final pillar on which you're going to build your character is going to be your class. And the classes are, in the core rulebook, there are 7. And at the time of recording, it isn't out yet, but there is a new source book coming out that will be introducing 3 new classes as well. I'm not going to go into those because, to be honest, I don't know an awful lot about them. And I want to wait and see what the final forms are like anyway. But the 3 different classes that are in here are the Envoy, who's described as the Envoy uses her personal magnetism and intelligence to help her allies and baffle her enemies, often in the service of negotiation or politics. So the Envoy is the chatty character. The Mechanic is adept at building and modifying machinery. The Mechanic has either an advanced artificial intelligence or a cutting-edge robot drone as his constant companion. And that's actually a good segue. Every single one of these classes has different, really, really cool options for how you want to advance your character. It doesn't seem to have as many options or as many choices that you have to make or get. I mean, depending on how you're seeing it, either get to make or have to make. There's less little fiddly bits. There's more clear, make your choice and you get a cool ability rather than you get a flat modifier. But every one of the classes has different ways to customize. So even though it's just you're playing a soldier, you could have 6 soldiers and they all are very different from each other. There's the Mystic, which Mystic magically channels the energy connecting all things, often through a focus on the divine or intuitive understanding of biological systems. So the Mystic is the first of the 2 magic casting classes in this. And the Mystic is probably, looking at the spell list, is closer to kind of like a cleric. But the Mystic can be put through a bunch of different lenses as well, too, depending on how you choose to play your character. They could be a healer, they could be a psychic, It could be a Xeno-Druid. There's all sorts of cool different ways that you can make, select a class option to make that very customized. So again, the one, mystic will feel very different from another, even without the choices of race and theme. Next one is operative. The operative has the skills to compete almost any mission requiring stealth and discretion, whether it be simple espionage or messy wet work. The operative is kind of your skill monkey. Not kind of, it is your skill monkey. So if you think of like the rogue from 5th edition, it's similar to that, but it's a little more flavorful. There's other specific ways. If you want to play a hacker, or you want to play like a infiltrator, or you want to play I'm not sure, an assassin. That might be a multi-class thing. But anyway, that's what you're playing as an operative. The next one is the Solarian, and this is one of the ones that is very, very distinct. The Solarian contemplates and gains power from the life cycles of stars. His techniques allow him to create a weapon or suit of armor from a mote of stellar energy. So the Solarian is kind of like your, your Kwisatz Haderach, your Jedi, or your Psi users. There's lots of other spellcasting things. The Solarian doesn't cast spells per se, but what the Solarian does is they get access to this kind of like, stellar force. It's either like a bright sun influenced thing, or it's a dark, black hole influenced thing. And you can create it in a aggressive kind of weapon, or you can create it in a protective kind of barrier. And there are a bunch of other different abilities you get to gain as you make gain levels and so forth. And each of those abilities are ways of manipulating that stellar energy. It's also got a neat mechanic of kind of like a momentum thing, where like you build up in the course of a tactical encounter, you build up stellar power. And that's either you build up like the solar power, or you build up the void power. And I can't remember if that's the two names for it, but it's the dark and the light stuff. So it's a very, very, very unusual class. That one has, apart from the different powers you've got, it definitely has I think it has less flexibility than what the other classes do, but it is a really interesting one. I have not seen one at the table yet, but I am hopeful to see one soon. And the next one is Soldier. The Soldier is your, it's the person you think of. It's the fighter. It's the thoroughly familiar with weapons of war. The Soldier is ready to wreak havoc when force is called for, and specializes in a particular fighting style. And the fighting style is the way that particular class is specialized. Are you a sniper? Are you a get up and fight in melee? Are you a run and gun type? Are you a heavy weapons type? Are you, I don't know, I'm trying to think what the other ones are. A grenadier. Do you like throwing grenades and shit like that? That's the stuff that you pick that specializes your character. And the final class in the core rulebook is the Technomancer. And the Technomancer is exactly what it sounds like. The Technomancer understands the connection between technology and magic and exploits them by bending reality to suit her needs. Now, the Technomancer is not, is not the traditional robed wizard. The Technomancer spells have a distinctly technological bent to them. And at first I thought, this is kind of, if I really want to play a traditional kind of like low tech wizard, why can't I play that with a Technomancer? It requires a lot of bending to make the Technomancer work that way. And the thing is, where I've settled on for that is like, that's not this game. That person would be so ridiculously disadvantaged, that particular type of character would be, if someone who comes from a backwoods setting or whatnot, would likely be a mystic rather than a, Technomancer. By backwoods, I mean low tech. Whereas someone who does have access to arcane energy in this particular world, there is a preponderance of ways that magic and technology work together. There's a type of item called fusions, which are kind of like sort of like magical bonuses you would get in traditional fantasy D20 fantasy role-playing games. But they're things that you can snap on, attached to your weapons or your armor, and they give you the special abilities. So this world has centuries of experience with those two things interacting in a more useful and positive way. So if a character that was a traditional spell chucker and strictly that with no magical or no technological component to it, it really would be someone who would be hindering themselves rather than trying to do what's best. So, but that said, I mean, that you may see that as just a bunch of justification because I love this game a lot. So that may very well be true too. But if you're expecting to be able to play that kind of thing where all you do is read scrolls and cast traditional magical spells, that class is not going to satisfy you. You'll be very limited in the spell selections that you make, or you may be. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, at the time, this game has a bunch of spells coming out in every single new supplement, so the pace of play could very much outpace, or the pace of the product line may quickly outpace what I'm saying here. So what do I know? But those are your 7 classes, and what you'll be making for your character, what you'll be playing, is a character that makes up all of those three elements. So you could play, say some of the characters we've had in our campaigns have been things like well, I mean, the interesting combos, I think in particular, an icon Yasaki mechanic. So it's and the way we described that was that this was effectively kind of like the Pact World's equivalent of a YouTube star. It's someone who is a YouTube, extreme sports thing, but what he was doing was going into these dangerous areas, and my players, I'm trying to think of another different spin on things, a more unusual spin. The priest element is kind of neat. Actually, I don't even have to think of my own creativity. One of the neat things they do in the book is at the end of each class, they give you sample builds. So ways that you can potentially build it. So like this is the different class combos for the Silurian. I think it is. Yeah. So, a Xeno Druid, which is, takes the Xeno Seeker theme, whatever class or whatever race you want. And then I'm sorry, these are the Mystics. That's not the Solarians. But anyway, there's, each of these different classes, boom, you got these cool sample builds that give you suggestions on what ability scores you should focus on, what specializations you should take for your class, what class features you should take for it, and so forth. It's by no means obligatory, but for coming into the game either fresh or even just looking for inspiration, these provide a really terrific place to start to come up with your characters. What do you do in the game? So what you do in the game is, if you think of what the 3 tiers are, or the way they're described in D&D 4th, of exploration, role-playing, and combat, that's what this game is really about. But it's cast in a much larger scope. It's in a intergalactic scope. I don't think, apart from the most recent adventure path, none of the adventures stay on one world. You definitely travel between worlds and a lot of things, and that's really easy to do. For one, because every character group of player characters has a ship, and the way that the travel is, or the intergalactic travel is modeled in this, or the faster than light travel, is in something called a drift drive. So the broad strokes of the setting is that about 300 years ago, there was this incident that was called the, is it the Gap? This is the kind of thing that if you were a more diligent, or if I was a more diligent person preparing, the Gap, I was right. Nice. So what it was is this thing called the Gap. And basically it's this mysterious incident where effectively everybody forgot who they were, what they were doing, and whatever. It just, all history and all memory was wiped out from every world that was known. The default setting for Starfinder is this setting called the Pact World system. So that's the Pact World system. And I think it's 10 worlds, 9 or 10 worlds. That really have cognates to our solar system. The one place that's missing is the default setting for Pathfinder is a place called Golarion. That planet has gone missing. And no one knows, because of the Gap, no one knows where it went. But in its place is this enormous space station called Absalom Station. And on Absalom Station, there is this thing called the Starstone. And the Starstone, it's actually carried over from the Pathfinder setting. It effectively serves as like the loudest navigation beacon for drift travel. And I'm trying to look at the timeline here. 3 years after the Gap is when this kind of like tripartite or focused god called the Triune, which is made up of 3 different technological gods, broadcast out this technology about the drift. And it's this new kind of intergalactic travel. And that's the in-universe explanation for it. But basically what it is when you are wanting to travel somewhere, if you're traveling within system, it's a certain length of time. You know, if you're traveling by drift. If you're traveling outside of the packed world system, you just figure out, is it near space or is it far space? And depending on how far you're going, that will dictate how long it takes you. And it doesn't matter where you're going in, you know, the vast, I think it's called, and then near space. If you're going to the vast, it's a whatever the, you know, D6 random amount of weeks. I think it's 2d6. Or if you're traveling with, you know, to the near systems, then it's 1d6, I think, weeks. So it's quite a bit of time you spend in, you know, in the drift, which also means that you constantly have opportunities to do downtime. So smart design decision. You don't have to worry about, like, how do I pause the story so my characters can rest up and do downtime shit? No problem. You've got your travel time in this. It's also really, really terrific because anything you can conceive of, anything that you as the DM want to introduce, or any of the cool stuff that you find in the supplements, you can have your characters get there very easily. It's all within the same, relatively speaking, within the same distance, you know? So it's, that's really cool. And the way that that sort of the packed world civilization is rediscovering the world is by going out and setting new drift beacons. And as time goes on, you know, and as that signal from Triune goes out further, more and more people are discovering drift technology. So there's more and more people who are able to rejoin kind of the intergalactic civilization. You know, I'll talk about the Aslanti Empire, which is a rival intergalactic organization or interplanetary organization that is one of the main enemies in the setting, and certainly is the key enemy in the Against the Aeon Throne setting. So yeah. So anyways, that's the sort of the setting. And that's how, you know, when I first got the game, again, I looked at it and I'm like, there's only 9 worlds. This feels very, very small for an intergalactic world game. But I didn't realize that, you know, every month when a new adventure path comes out, there's a new planet they completely identify. And it's often in the near or the vast. Well, it's in one of those things, which means that if you want to add, if you get inspired by something, you can add that to your campaign like that, because the players can get there. They just have to have a reason to go there. And on top of that, because there's so much undiscovered because of the gap, you can introduce whatever you want. You know, you can introduce any kind of thing you can conceive of into, you know, being out there in the vast, which I think is great, because it both gives a clear, you know, defined setting for those who want that kind of thing, but also unlimited creativity for the DMs who want to introduce stuff without screwing up the setting. So so that's really cool. And what you do is, you know, the packed worlds themselves, I'm probably not doing them justice, but every one of the worlds, you get a brief description of it in the core rulebook, but every single one of the worlds has its own interesting things going on, you know? Like, for instance, on Akiton, which is the equivalent of Mars. On Akiton, there is, you know, there was this massive industry that was driven by corporations that that mined this specific substance that was used in basically like pre-drift technology. And as soon as the drift technology kind of took root and became the popular way of travel, suddenly what was this enormously valuable thing is bust. So you have this, you know, this sweeping kind of, you know, there's giant worms, kind of like purple worms, but like much bigger in scope, very much like Dune type worms. There's savage tribes with 4-armed creatures that roam the deserts, kind of like, you know, John Carter or the Barsoom stories. There are evil, you know, corporations and decrepit culture, kind of like, you know, cyberpunk settings. And this is what, boom, there's what the page for Akiton looks like. There are mysterious psychic organizations, secrets dating back, you know, thousands of years before the gap, that are lurking out there as well. So, you know, that's just one of the worlds that make up the packed worlds. And in addition to each of the different worlds, there are these different organizations that are active in the packed worlds that have different interests that are set out in the core rulebook as well too. Some of them are clearly set up as kind of like adversary factions, but some of them are allies. like the Starfinder Society or the stewards. Stewards are kind of like space cops. If you really want to play a space cop going around and, knocking heads and, busting crooks, that's what you'd play, the stewards. If you want to be involved in exploration and so forth, you join the Starfinder Society. How about playing a merciless servant of law? Well, we got the Hell Knights. And those familiar with Pathfinder, Hell Knights survived into the modern era. They survived past the gap, and they fly around in these like devil, occupied massive starships, dispensing law and crushing the piracy. And there's one of my favorites as well too is Abadar Corps. So basically think of like, depending on how you want to spin it, it's either the soulless corporation / church, or it is the clearest expression of a capitalist or like banking god in any setting I've ever encountered. And you can choose to, put your spotlight on your adventure or your campaign on any one or many of these things. And in the core rulebook as well, if you want to, have that touchstone to Pathfinder and D&D, they give you rules in the core rulebook for playing dwarves and elves and all the core, classes or races rather that are part of the D&D tradition: gnomes, half elves, half orcs, and so forth, halflings. And where they fit in the Starfinder setting. I think it's clever that they didn't put the focus on them. The focus is on the new creatures, but they're in there in the core rulebook. So if you really want to play a space elf, or you really want to play a space dwarf, or whatever, that's there for you. And those are definitely parts of the Pathfinder or Starfinder setting. The Starfinder setting has all of the cool shit that's in a traditional D&D or Pathfinder style game. So there are genie races that have been recently introduced. There are drow who live on this, blasted rock called Apostate. It's a, I can't remember if it's a planet or a planetoid or a moon, but it's very much like, yeah, it's a terrifying place full of space drow, and gosh, there's orcs, and some of these creatures some of the races have gone through neat kind of twists from their traditional things, like orcs. Orcs are often, I think they're more orderly. I can't remember offhand, but it's got a neat twist to it from what I remember when I read about it. But I do like that they put the focus on these new things, because it helps you understand that this is not just D&D in space. It's its own thing. So that's what you're going to be doing in the game is, depending on what the adventure paths that have been published so far have included, a really interesting mystery / archaeological heist. There's a great horror themed adventure where you're, fighting against this evil kind of scientist. There's a cool one where you're trying to prevent this evil empire from collecting this magical MacGuffin. And there's one where you're basically, the current one that's coming out, it's not done yet, where you're taking up arms against a potential invading army from the sun. From the elemental plane of fire that's going to come out through the sun, because in Starfinder, there is a whole city and different communities that are within the sun, which I love. I think it's such a cool idea. It's so bonkers, and it's such a great example of what Starfinder does, because Starfinder combines, that world has elements of magic and elements of tech. You can think of, almost anything, like any crazy thing. There are space whales that swim their way around the sun. And that's one of the goddess of the sun. Her biggest church is in that city that is built within the sun, and it's a mystery. No one knows what built that or what technology it came from. And that's part of the fun of the setting as well too. With the gap, is that there are constantly mysteries, just like in D&D. But instead of ancient lost civilizations or whatnot, you're rediscovering this stuff in that kind of like every episode of Star Trek that deals with an ancient lost, the Iconian Gateway or whatever. That stuff's out there. The lost Sith civilization, from Star Trek or Star Wars. Gosh, I'm gonna get hate mail for that fuck up. So that's what you're gonna do in this is, any kind of trouble you could conceive of that your characters could get into in any other science fiction role-playing game, that's what you could do. You could play traders that are going back and forth, carrying cargo and getting in adventures. You could play mercenaries who are out for hire. There is a cool mercenary group called I don't remember what the name of the legion is, but I'll show it when I'm in the Pack Worlds book. You could just be a bunch of guns for hire, like troubleshooters. You could be members of a rebellion. There are different places, both in some of the adventure paths, or one of them in particular, where you're rebelling against an empire, or you could pick one of the Pack Worlds where there are ongoing conflicts, and you just tweak the game. You don't have a spaceship, instead you're set. What if you're part of an Akiton community that is being trying to be basically driven out by corporations? If you think of the plot of Pale Rider, that's basically what you could do, or Yojimbo, or Fistful of Dollars, or whatever. It's really, or you could be like Shadowrunners, to be honest. You could be a bunch of ne'er-do-wells who are hired by corporations to do evil shit to other corporations, or factions. That's the kind of, there's no limit to really what you can do, and it's just a matter of figuring out where in the Starfinder world you want to do that stuff. And because it's such a vast setting, you can really do whatever, fit any of those concepts in there. What's in the book? So let's talk about the actual book itself. So the core rule book has all the rules for play. So that's your skills, your feats, your classes, your races, your themes, your space combat, your vehicle combat. It's got some vehicles in there. It's got some gear in there. It's got some great rules and advice for dungeon masters. It has rules for creating like traps and threats, like poisons or curses or diseases or whatever. And and then also a pretty decent sized section on the setting itself. So you get it's not like a massive comprehensive thing, but I mean there's about 80 pages or so that's just setting material. And there's certainly more than enough to get you going in your game. There's also advice on setting difficulties, providing rewards, and the gear section is really worth taking a quick peek at as well, only because they do one of my favorite things, which is they give you pictures, so you get to see what your cool stuff, boom, looks like. Like there's a section on the guns. I don't think every single one is included. But here's an idea of just how many guns are in the, or weapons, I should say, are in the rulebook. One key difference between this and Pathfinder: there's no penalty to shooting into melee. It's obviously a sci-fi game where a lot of people are going to be using guns, so that was I think a smart decision. Here's some of the armors as well too. And of course, there are armor that incorporates lots of magic stuff as well too. But there's powered armor, just like kind of not Iron Man necessarily, but you kind of think like the cargo loader from Aliens. That plus, or like Space Marines armor from Warhammer 40K. There's augmentations like cybernetics. There's some great rules for computers in this. Hackers, basically, there's good ways for modeling like hacking in this that does not derail the game. One of the problems with Cyberpunk and Shadowrun is that when you have a hacker or a decker, they had their own adventure and then everyone else did their own thing. In modern versions, in 4th edition, 5th edition Shadowrun, they did a better job of kind of making sure that they had ways to they were involved in whatever was going on. But I really like the solution they have in this, which takes advantage of that tiered kind of thing, where you set difficulties that are comparative levels, and that tells you how difficult things are for you. There's also a bunch of neat magical items. There's technological items, magic items, and then hybrid items as well, which are part magical, part technology. And there's tons of those in here. One thing that is noticeably absent from the core rulebook, however, is adversaries. There is one, I think there's precisely one adversary that's set out in here, which is a 20th level or CR20 goblin, which serves as a good example. I mean, the reason they did it is so they can show you all the different, nitty-gritty bits of how to, how to play that, or how to read those stats. But what it means is that you don't have any adversaries that you can use with just the core rulebook. And the reason that's important is because adversaries in this, and I'm saying adversaries because I mean anyone who you're struggling against in combat, in whatever, they are built by a completely different set of rules than what the characters are. So this, honestly, in that sense, is closer to now Pathfinder 2nd edition, but also D&D 4th, where, and honestly, every previous version of D&D before 3rd, the rules that you use to make your adversaries are completely different. They're much more streamlined. They have a very they have a tiered kind of set of stats that then you tweak to make your specific monster. And that sounds boring, but I assure you that it isn't. I'll show you where you find that stuff in a moment here. But in play, it is extremely versatile. It's a really, really powerful tool for the DM because you get to make up stuff on the fly if need be. Now, you may be the type of player or DM who is like well prepared ahead of time and there's only going to be set pieces, but if you happen to have, if you're someone like me who runs a more loosey-goosey game and a fight might break out when you didn't intend one to, well, even if they don't have pre-made stats, you can have stats to work from and then improvise very easily just from the Alien Archive, which is the next book I'll talk about. So that was a bit of, I mean, that's a bit of a bummer, but like this book itself is already, 524 pages long. So it is a massive tome. And the fact that if they had a choice between providing the setting material or providing the adversary stuff, I'm glad they made the decision they did. And this is just an example of what the setting stuff looks like. So there is Absalom Station. The art in this is incredible. It is on par with any other gaming product that I own. There we go. There's Akiton again. There's Verces, this world that does not rotate. So it has two different sides, a cold side. There's the Adari. Look at that. I got the name right. Hot damn. Score 1 from the memory. There is the Diaspora, which is like the asteroid belt. Like, take a look at that. That's just so cool. And it's full of, you know, plucky miners and evil space pirates. Oh, and I forgot about Eox. So this is Eox. This, like millennia before the gap, and even before the Pathfinder setting, or before the setting, the current timeline of the Pathfinder setting, Eox was a world that was full of living people, but went to war with some other planet, and then basically in the course of fighting that war, inadvertently devastated their own planet. So they are now currently a planet of undead, and that's just awesome. And they're not a default villain. They did fight initially. They tried to invade Absalom Station and take the Absalom Station for themselves. And the reason for that, incidentally, is because of that Starstone. And I forgot to mention about the drift travel. One of the cool things about the Starstone is that wherever your character is, wherever they are in the wider universe, it is always, I believe, a day to get to the Starstone. So you can always get back home to your home base if Absalom Station is your home base, always by a day. So Eox tried to seize Absalom Station, but were driven back by the forces of the Pact Worlds, and they made an alliance and decided to become members of the Pact World in to resist the Veskarium, I believe. So you can kind of see this running theme of, bigger, badder enemy, let's ally together and then we'll fight that, and then, new enemy, but there's a bigger and badder one, let's get together and fight that one. Not all the Eoxians were happy with that, though, and a massive part of their space fleet just disappeared, and that's called the Corpse Fleet. So imagine a space fleet full of undead soldiers, and the full gamut of the magical shit that you see in Pathfinder and Starfinder, right? So like there's wraiths, there's liches, there's ghosts, there's zombies, there's whatever, ghouls, and yeah, and they've disappeared, and their ships are made out of like necromantic technology too. That's one of the main adversaries in the first adventure path, and it's just I think a really, really great example of the kind of crazy evocative stuff that only takes place in this setting. It's got some similar characteristics to stuff you find in other settings, but it transcends that and becomes its own awesome thing. Incidentally, there are some who believe that there are still connections between Eox, or some of the rulers on Eox, and the Corpse Fleet, that they sort of had their cake and ate it too, though they're undead and they don't eat. Here's Triaxis. this cool world where that that mercenary order, the kind of like French Foreign Legion type thing was. Liavara, which is a gas giant with these floating cities. And a bunch of, here's Aposte. That's the dead world of Drow and whatnot. And I'll show you one quick more one here too, because it's the second world out, first world out, which is, actually I'll show you all of them. Here you go. Here's Castrovel. That's the one I was talking about with the elves and the Lashunta. Look at that. And this big dinosaur in the foreground there. And Abalon. Abalon is populated by this really unusual, they're called, I think they're called Versites. They are the, Anacytes. They are the sentient machines. So think of like maybe friendly versions of the machines from the Matrix. That's one way of thinking about it. And then, of course, there is the world in the sun. Look at that. That is the one of the settlements that sits inside the sun in the Pact Worlds. So that's what's in the core rulebook, is all that material. So there's everything you would need to play as a player, and everything you need to get your campaign started, absent the adversaries, can be found here. Now, because this is a D20 game, it's obviously all open source, so it's part of the D20 license, and there is a system reference document you can find online for all of this stuff. So all just the rules themselves you can find online. There's also a program put out by a company that I can't remember right now, that is a Starfinder like builder. And it's the same company that put out the previous Pathfinder builder as well too. And I can't remember the name of it, but I'm sure if you do a search for it, I only mention it because it's, I mean, it is an online only service, and it is a pay service, but it's awesome. Like I find it very, very helpful for just throwing stats together. You can also find a adversary builder and a character builder online that's free. So so that's what's in the core rulebook. The second book that came out for it was the Alien Archive. And the Alien Archive, it's interesting the way that they're releasing these, because there's 2 of them out so far, and there's a third one coming soon. And what this does is it gives you a bunch of different, it's kind of like a monster manual. So there's a bunch of new monsters. There's also a crap ton of new species to play. So, you know, there are 20 new races with full rules for playing characters. And these run the gamut of, you know, crazy things like, let's see here, reptoids. So if you want to play like the shape-changing aliens from V, you got that. There are, what are they? The Draconoids, I think they're called. Dragonkin. So giant dragon-shaped things from Triaxis. You can get that as well too. There's a rules for a variety of like sci-fi things. Here's one of my favorites as well, the Contemplative. I want to play a giant floating brain. There you go. And there's also, and the Skittermanders. I cannot leave the Skittermanders out. Skittermanders are a race introduced in Starfinder that have become kind of one of the signature, you know, races in the same way goblins did, or mascot races. That's the Skittermanders. They're these adorable little 4-armed or 6-armed things, and I adore them. They're from the Vesk's homeworld. So anyway, there's a bunch of adversaries in there, but what this also introduces is rules for summoning spells. So and it's very build your own thing. Like it's a very, very customizable template-based system. So you can customize, you can't just like customize on the fly. What you do is you sort of build a slate of different things you can summon, and then that's what you summon. So there is an enormous amount of ability to really be creative in what your, you know, whether it's your mystic or your technomancer can summon. You want to have someone who specializes in like robots and elementals? Cool. You want someone who specializes in like fey creatures or animals? No problem. How about shadow creatures or creatures that are of divine origin, like angels and whatnot? No problem as well. Super easy to do. In addition, this gives you all the rules for building adversaries and building enemies. And the reason that is particularly useful, I'll show you what the chart is. There's basically, you take, you know, one of 3 different types of critters, you know, spellcasters, experts, or warriors, or combatants. That's what the chart looks like. And this is your starting point. This isn't the final thing. You start here. That'll give you some baseline stats to go from, and then you kind of build it from there by making certain selections. But what this also is something that you can look to on the fly if you have you were unprepared for an encounter. For instance, I had in one of my campaigns, the players spent more time in one of the pre-made adventures exploring this world, and the adventure itself didn't give me enough cool creatures to populate that world. And the characteristics of the world, it was arboreal, so tons and tons of forests, but it was also suffused with this like electric charge. So there were places where there was this full of lightning fog that could be deadly to people, but also a lot of the creatures there developed ways of resisting and manipulating the electricity. One of the things they introduced was this fun little creature called a hobgar, which is like basically like a chimp or orangutan that could throw lightning bolts. They're a total pain in the ass, and they love destroying technology. But I decided to make something that hunted the hobgars, and I wanted to make it even scarier than what the hobgars were. So, but I didn't have time to, this was an impulse thing. So what did I do is I grabbed my Alien Archive, I flipped to what I thought was the appropriate CR and kind of went from there. That way I had a set of stats I could work from, so the players weren't just, they were actually fighting something and they had specific numbers to go against. But I also could indulge my creativity, and if I wanted to have an attack that did, high damage, kinetic damage, or energy damage, I could just look off of here and it would tell me what an appropriate number would be. And I could judge up or down if I wanted to. And what that also means is that you can scale up anything in here very easily. So if you want to have a robot to challenge your enemies your characters at low level, you can do that. If you find something in here, you're like, oh God, this is so cool, but my characters are 5th level, not 12th, so I can't use it. No problem. It is an absolute cinch to dial that down in here. And that's something that I used to love about 4th edition, is that in every other version of D&D, at default, you look at it and you're like, well, I'm going to have to rebuild this monster. I love this thing, but my characters it's not an appropriate challenge for them. So I can't really throw it at them and, cry fair here. This lets you get around that. The other consequence of this means that if your characters outpace a pre-written adventure, it is a cinch to rework it, because the math will all work out. The number of creatures that you've got versus them, as long as the relative levels are the same, no problem. And this interfaces with the gear system as well too, so that if you're making an NPC or an adversary that has a specific level, you just look for gear that is appropriate to that level, and then that's what they're carrying with them. And then surprise, surprise, your characters will end up with it if they defeat them, or if they bargain with them or whatever. So there's some really clever, like, high-level design decisions that are in here that make it a very, very easy game to run and to to adapt to whatever creative whims that you want to go to. The book says over 80 bizarre new life forms, so there is a bunch of really cool stuff in here. And as I mentioned, there's 2 of them out so far, and the second one I'm not going to go through these page by page necessarily, but I will point out one of my absolute favorites. Which is, to be honest, the reason that I ended up running the campaign starting in 2019. And this also, unfortunately, shows what a simple creature I am. But uplifted bears. So space bears. Space bears are a player character race in this game. They are fucking awesome. It was the thing that got me in the game. I love the space bears in this. And this is the thing that I find with every one of these supplements too, is there's always just amazing new things of like, oh, I didn't think of that. Or they've got neat new ways of fusing the pre-existing stuff, the D&D stuff or the D&D elements into the Starfinder universe. I'll talk about it a little later, but one of the adventure paths is this one that takes place or associates with the plane of shadow, and they give an amazing, like, kind of mini essay about the inhabitants of the plane of shadow and how to incorporate it into Starfinder. And it's so cool. Like, it's such a cool idea and so many cool elements. I'm like, I can't wait to get this into my game. What this said, I mentioned that the Alien Archive 1 gave you the rules for summoning and for building creatures. This gives you the rules for shapeshifting. So all the rules for making custom spells to transform yourself, your allies, your enemies, that's what's in here. And they also introduced some new ways to build characters. Now, they did not reproduce the building stuff out of here, which means that you know, if you're choosing one or the other, you go with Alien Archive 1 to have everything. But there are great reasons for each of these. It's not out yet, but Alien Archive 3, which will likewise introduce a bunch of new races to play, it also will include rules for sidekicks. And, you know, they don't mean just sidekicks. They mean minions or henchmen or whatever. And that's awesome. I love that idea. So if you want to have companions like animal companions or, you know, a squire or space squire, you know, for your thing, or you want to have your, you know, you're playing a military campaign, you want to have a squad of troops, that's going to be the thing that will help you build that. And I think that's brilliant. It's great that each one of these things also introduces new innovations in terms of the what do you call it? The mechanics. So there's neat, cool new ways to play the game and expand the game. Even if you never use the monsters in there, there's more than enough creative tools in there to adapt for your game. The last kind of like core source book I want to talk about, and Alien Archive 2 is not core. I would consider Alien Archive 1 and the core rulebook. If you want to run the game, those are the two things you should be looking into getting, either in digital or in physical. And then if you're going to play for an extended length of time as well too, the Armory is a terrific source book. Now, I mentioned that the gear is all level based, and that's of particular importance for the tactical stuff. And in the core rule book, if you happen to favor, I mentioned there's different kinds of damage in it. If, let's say, you happen to favor a sniper rifle and you really like it doing thunder damage because for whatever reason, either you've built the character that way or you like that thematically, so that's what you want to have. And I don't think there actually is something called thunder damage. I think it's force damage. So let's say it's lightning damage or electricity damage. That's what you want to build, right? Well, in the core rule, there you will not be able to stick with a lightning gun, you know, from level 1 up to level 20. This fixes that. This is everything. If you want to stick with a cryo gun from level 1 to level 20 and it's a handgun, no problem. We got you covered. Similarly, there's a huge amount of new gear or armor and stuff like that in here. Some new magic items and some new options. Oh, one thing I didn't mention in the core rulebook, there is in Starfinder, very much like in Pathfinder, there are archetypes. And what archetypes did in Pathfinder was that they basically tweaked the way that your class worked. But each of them was keyed to a specific class. So you would have like, you know, a bunch of different archetypes for fighter. And if you're playing a fighter, you could pick one of those things and it would modify what you got for your class. Archetypes in Starfinder are not linked to classes. Instead, they're just generic things that you can select and anyone can select them. Now, there are certain ones that just make more sense for certain classes than others, but the free, again, it's the freedom of creation of character and the flexibility to create whatever thing you want to play is really there. And this one introduces some new archetypes like the augmented. So if you really want to play a hyper cybered up character, no problem. And then this is a trend that seems to happen in each of the source books too, is they introduce new abilities, at least in the hardback source books, new abilities for each of the classes. One of the upcoming books will have, I imagine, a huge amount of new material because it is a player-focused book. That's the one that introduces those 3 new core classes as well as a bunch of new options for characters. And I imagine a lot of feats and stuff as well, too. Feats are, I should say, gosh, I should have dealt with this in the core rulebook, but feats and skills are dramatically streamlined in this. They are not, Pathfinder did a really good job of streamlining the feats from 3rd edition. This seems like a similar iteration. Your skill list in this is also likewise consolidated. So, and that, which is good because, you know, it's a space opera style game. So it feels, it's easier to have a character who is capable in many more areas than it is in Pathfinder. The final hardback book that's out at the time of recording is the Packed Worlds book, and this is your guide to the Packed Worlds setting. In addition to a bunch of really, really interesting and fun material to help flesh out the world, there's also a ton of new options for players in here. So players and dungeon masters or game masters in Starfinder, I guess, will find useful material to use in here. There's new spells, there's new magic items, there's new gear, there's new feats, there's new archetypes, and there are new themes, a ton of new themes, a new one for each of the worlds in the Packed Worlds. And those are things like Dragon blood. Do you want to play a character who's got you know, a little bit of ice dragon or bronze dragon blood in them? There you go. That's your theme that you pick for that, or space pirate, or explorer, or corporate operative. You know, it is a fascinating setting. You know, like I think it's one of those settings that just your mind reels with the amount of adventure opportunities you can introduce there. You know, depending on what you really want to focus on. If you want to focus on more of the mundane, there's plenty of cool corporate intrigue and political intrigue that you can deal with. That's always going to have that element of the you know, fantastic science fantasy setting for Starfinder. But if you really want to lean into the fantasy, one of my favorite potential adversaries in this is this ancient green dragon that lives on Castrovel, that has control over this ancient mystic elven portal network that hires people to find out where the fuck they go. And that's just amazing. I love that idea. Like, you know, if you could think of Stargate, but instead of working for, you know, a military organization, you're being sent by an ancient green dragon, and who knows what, you know, interests them. And then the people who are adversaries to that, the elves, the Formians, the Lashunta, everyone wants access to that thing too. So would, you know, more nefarious networks too. So there's all sorts of ways to, you know, to get, yeah, to get, you know, a campaign going in this. That's one of my sort of pet ones. Now, what about just trying this out? Like, Kev, that sounds like an awful lot of books to buy or possibly dive into. Well, no problem. Paizo's got you covered there with last year's free RPG Day thing, Skittershot. This is a one-shot adventure that has everything that you need to play. I can't remember. It's either free or it's right next door to free, available on the Paizo website in PDF format. And then what this is you play a crew of 4 Skittermanders who have become kind of, whoop, there we go. They kind of become more iconic characters. I saw at the last weekend was PaizoCon, and at PaizoCon they actually released now finally plush versions of these guys and gals. So that's pretty cool. This is the physical copy was released as part of free RPG Day last year, and then they sold a copy on. I wasn't able to snag a copy before, but I got one from Paizo afterwards. They have a new one coming out this year as well, which I cannot remember the name of it. If you play in person as well, there is, as with all modern role-playing games, a pretty good DM screen as well too, which looks like, well, this. Great hard stock, and it's got all the useful stuff you would need right on the screen. I've used it every time I've played, even online. I find it extremely helpful. But there's another way to get in. Let's say you decide to try out Skittershot, you like it, but you're not sure you want to dive in, you know, whole hog. Well, Paizo's got you covered there as well too, because they recently released last month the beginner box. And you know, for those who may have been familiar with the Paizo or the Pathfinder First Edition starter set, Paizo really knows how to put together a starter set because this thing not only has incredible production value to it, it comes with, I'm just going to show you a couple of things in here, a whole bunch of very nice tokens, which have art ripped directly from the books. That is, Kev, you're doing a terrible job of getting the camera to focus. Let me do a better job here. Boom. Hold my hand up behind it. Oop, there we go. So there's a dragon. Oh, there's my damn hand. How about that? There we go. Come on, camera. Work with us. Sorry, folks. It's just not going to cooperate. Well, there's a little version. Yeah, trust me, the art is incredible on these things, and it's nice hard cardboard as well, too. All of their books or all the tokens are like that. If you're familiar with the Pathfinder ones, you'll know exactly what you're getting here. There's a couple books in here as well too that are all beautiful, full color, and they've got rules for playing pre-gens or for creating some characters and playing up to, I can't remember what level it is, but a certain level. This is a really terrific purchase. It's got a great adventure. We actually get to fight that scrap dragon or whatever the heck it is in there, and it's a great introduction, and it has a basically like a mini version of the Alien Archive in here, completely compatible. Like I have not done a clear comparison, so I may be wrong about this, but it seems like it's the full rules that are in here too. You know, and one of the things that this that adventure does, in addition to teaching the rules, teaching how to kind of play, it shows, I think, as well, and so do the adventure paths, how much fun it is to have a level-based gear thing. Because, there's a reason that people play looter shooters on, video games for fucking ad nauseum. Is because it's cool getting cool stuff, for hours and hours and hours on end, is because it's cool getting neat stuff. And that is kind of the fun thing with Starfinder. Not kind of, it's one of the very cool things, is that gaining a level as a character, as a player, is really cool. But what's also cool is finding a new slight upgrade for your weapon or your armor or some new gear or whatever, or crafting that thing, because it's a post scarcity economy for the most part. You can use this sort of like, I can't remember what they call it in the game, but it's basically like non-standard material to create whatever, materials or whatever thing you want. Some things require special components, but for the most part, you can make whatever you need from that, so long as you've got that like base material, which makes for a really great, way to craft your own stuff. If you don't have to wait for it to drop, or you don't have to come up with some cockamamie story version for why your character happened to stumble across an amazing gun for them or whatever. It's there. And so that's what's in the beginner box. If you want to go beyond just the starter set or the starter adventure, the quick start from Skittershot, and you want to try something bigger, the beginner box is really, really cool. If you search online too, you can find a bunch of unboxings for it as well. I know my buddy Matt on Jowzam's Den has a great unboxing of it, and he ran part of the adventure that's in there too. So if you want to see what that is, you can go there and check it out. But let's get back to the other stuff. So one of the things that Paizo does a really good job of as well is providing some neat accessories. In addition to the beginner box, you can also snag, cool things like a critical fumble deck, a critical hit deck, and conditions. So this game, just like in Pathfinder or 3rd edition D&D or whatever, actually, and 5th edition as well, it uses conditions to model certain effects. So if you get hit by a certain thing, and they just go with a standard condition to model the impact of whatever that thing is, whether you're stunned or whether you're poisoned or whatever. And this provides all little handout cards for whatever is on there. Whoops, I got the wrong one. This one, the conditions card. It's also got a funny little picture of a space goblin suffering from that effect on each of the cards. And then there's the critical hit, critical fumble, which is specialized for whatever you are doing, like whatever kind of thing, whether it's a spell or a kinetic attack or a energy attack. I guess that's one other difference I should mention. So you don't have, if you're familiar with Pathfinder, there's not touch attack and flat-footed and your regular AC and shield AC and whatever. You only have two. You have kinetic AC and you have energy AC. And that seems like not enough until you start playing. And also, if you remember, if you're coming from Pathfinder, that may seem like, oh, that's so simplified. But if you're coming from an OSR game, there's only one AC in those. Like there's one kind of AC. Now they really do hide flat-footed or whatever else in the combat modifiers. So there are sort of cognates of that. They're just not called that. You don't model all those different kinds. It's a sci-fi setting, so really it's kinetic, or you're getting hit with something physical, or you're getting blasted by something energy. That's the way you model those two different ACs. So then I mentioned as well too that there are some tokens in the in the beginner box. There's also, as with the Pathfinder game, they've been very diligent about releasing different tokens with each of the different modules or adventure paths, I should say, and the Alien Archive. So this is the one from Alien Archive 1. You got all your different size bases that are in here, and you've got a ton of every single thing that's in the Alien Archive is in here, and it's got the exact same art, or in some cases better. They scour the rule books, the source books, and whatever else to find the images and put them on the tokens. So if you are someone who plays in person, they're awesome. It's a great way of of not having to describe, of adding a nice little extra element to immerse the players in where they are, to see what they're facing. And on that as well too, they have published a crap ton of mats, or maps that you can play on. These are all the ones that are out so far. And they've got a variety of different things like starships, space stations, urban sprawl, hospital, and each of these is double-sided. And they also give one of the first ones that was released was a Starfield as well, too, for you to play the tactical starship combat. All these are dry erase and whatever, as you'd expect from a modern gaming book. And they're pretty, I'll show you the size, because they're not quite as big as I thought they'd be, but they were bigger than I thought. So this is what they look like. Hello. So that's the size. Ugh. They're nice and sturdy as well, too, so no amount of folding is going to make these things fall apart. And yeah, and it's a great, another little way to make your in-person play all the better. I typically play online myself, and if you do play online, I don't know about Fantasy Grounds. I imagine they have that too, but I do know that Roll20 has full token sets for Alien Archive and for the Starfinder core book as well too, and you can get the full compendium for those two things on there as well. They've also released a combat pad for it as well too, so if you like using the combat pad for Pathfinder or from some other product, they do have a branded combat pad for Starfinder as well, which also includes a bunch of magnets and stuff like that too. I have not made use of this yet because I haven't had a chance to play it in person. So that's again, I'm not going to show all the different tokens that have come out for it. Oh boy. But suffice it to say, every single adventure path has more tokens that have come out for it, as well as every core rulebook. Every one of those hardbacks has new tokens for it as well. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the adventure paths. Now, if you are the way that Paizo modeled their well, they had two different ways they did module releases. What old school players would recognize as modules. They would have standalone modules, which would just be adventures set for a certain level, and you play them, and it starts and ends, and that's the story. They also had something called an adventure path, and I imagine that everyone, if not, well, most people are probably familiar with that. But basically, every month they publish a new module, and that module is part of a 6-part adventure path. Now, so far, at the time of recording, there are 4 adventure paths out. One of them is only halfway out right now. Those 4 are Dead Suns, Against the Aeon Throne, Signal of Screams, and Dawn of Flame. And then the next one that's after that is one I'm also very excited for, called Attack of the Swarm. And at the outset, I mentioned there was that one giant hive mind alien race called the Swarm. Well, that's what that adventure is going to focus around. Now, one of the main things that was interesting about the adventure path releases for Starfinder is the initial adventure path was 6, but then the next 2 were only 3. And I'm running one of the 3 ones because, well, I mean, I'll say why in a moment, but then they went back to Dawn of Flame is currently a 6-part one. And I think that Attack of the Swarm is 6-part as well too. But I'm hopeful that they will go to that 3-3-6. 6-3-3 module or cycle, because I think that I imagine that their adventure paths sold quite well, and having a 6-part adventure that takes you players from first level up to 20th, that's great, and there are obviously tons and tons of people who like playing that way, and there are, fortunately, Starfinder has one full adventure path right now, and another one that'll be done in about 2 months' time, because I think I'm tomorrow my copy of Dawn of Flame, or the newest adventure, should show up. So there's 2 full ones that are there. But the thing is not every group wants to lock themselves in for a set, arc for that whole period. For someone like me, I like having the freedom of get me to a certain point, use the module to kind of start the thing going, and then let's see where the campaign goes. And that's one of the reasons why I actually chose to start running the Against the Aeon Throne adventure path, and why I'm enjoying it so much is because, well, so this one is one of their 3-part ones, and I think it takes you from level 1 to level 5. It's either 5 or 6, so it's really some good formative levels, but and each of them is a really fun space opera kind of adventure. You got an awesome villain in the form of the Aslanti Star Empire, and some sinister dude who's behind this stuff. Look at that. And So, I mean, I really love that because for me, like what I plan on doing is we're going to play through this adventure path. And then based on what's happened, we're just going to keep on going. You know, we're going to see by that point, the characters will have really developed and I can follow the characters forward. Alternatively, the second one that came out after that was Signal of Screams. And it was also a 3-part thing. And Signal of Screams is, I think, 6 to 10. Is that right? 7th level characters is the final one. No, the first one, 11th. So I think it takes you to 7th to 13th is this one. And it can follow on from the Aeon Throne one, but it's only in the sense that the levels basically, you know, sort of match up. This one is a much different vibe. This is a horror adventure. And, you know, so you could just create 7th level characters, drop in and then play through and then, you know, carry on afterwards. And I really, you know, I like that they tried at least having these smaller stories because you can tell an amazing adventure path and story arc over the course of these 3 adventures. Both of these are incredibly interesting stories and satisfying in the same way that these longer arcs are. But, you know, it seems like that's the model they're following right now. I guess if you, I don't want to speculate as to why that is. I really do hope that they decide to not only lock in because it's harder to give a satisfying end to a midpoint in an adventure path than it is to just, you know, have played through a short one and then start taking the campaign where you want to go. Or alternatively, just have that be the campaign. You know, it has said like, I want to play through from level 1 to level 5, and then we'll call it a day, you know, and then we'll play something different. We'll play a different adventure path or we'll play something else. That is a much more manageable amount of time to play a game than what a 6, you know, book adventure path is. And I think the likelihood of people seeing them through to the end, you know, is just, it's more likely with a shorter book. You know, that's less of a race. There's a reason probably like shorter marathons or half marathons see more people run them than Ironman do, you know. But that said, you know, the adventure paths themselves, the adventures are very, very cool. And each of the adventures that have been published so far has been really interesting. And every single one of the adventures I mentioned introduces a new world. They often introduce a new species or two. They all definitely have more adversaries in them, sometimes which are, you know, characters you can play, sometimes not. They often introduce new starships, new technology, new gear, new spells sometimes. And yeah, and then also each of them typically has a new article on something. So, you know, even if you never get the adventure to the table, the thing that's awesome about these is that there's always half of the book is usually useful, at least a third, sometimes half, is all useful stuff otherwise. Whether whether you use it in the actual adventure or you use it for something else. Like, for instance, Against the Aeon Throne adventure path, they have one of the essays in here is the guide to the Aslanti Empire, which is awesome. So it gives me and in amongst these 3, they give you Aslanti tech, they give you Aslanti magic items, they give you Aslanti starships, then the setting, and then, you know, species that populate the Aslanti space. So this, in addition to being a very cool, tight adventure path, also gives you a complete, basically, guidebook for playing against the Aslanti. And that's what I'm going to be using when we, you know, finish this adventure path. Assuming my players survive, assuming my players want to keep playing, this is what we're going to do. Is we're going to be taking on the Aslanti Empire, and this gives me all the material I need to do that. And every single one of these does that thing too. I mentioned there was a cool adventure path that plays up the what do you call it? The Plane of Shadow. That's this bad boy here. And it has one of my favorite themes in it too. I mentioned that this always introduces new material. The theme in this one, paranormal investigator. So if you want to play like a one has an essay on running Starfinder as a horror game as well too. So those who are familiar with the channel know my predilection for horror and the idea of running a Starfinder horror thing, you know, which is going to be kind of like a space version of maybe X-Files or something like that. I love that idea. I absolutely love it. And what a great way to structure a campaign of a crew under a paranormal investigator going around, you know, investigating crazy paranormal crap. That's fucking super cool. The most recent adventure path, the one that's not quite done yet, is Dawn of Flame. And this is, I think, the most high fantasy one that they've done so far. This is the one of, the army from the, what do you call it? From the elemental plane of fire that may be invading packed space. That's crazy. And that's such a cool idea. And you know what? One of the, I saw, this is not my own, revelation, but someone else had described to me, for those who are older players as well too. One of the things that's really awesome about Starfinder is something that was the sensibility that was so amazing about the old Planescape setting. The old Planescape setting was you could incorporate a lot more. You could have adventures about ideas in that because of the different factions and stuff like that. Or the what are they called? Factions? I don't remember. I think they were factions. And then what do you call it? So it's that, and then also that you can have all sorts of crazy stuff in it and not have it break the rules or break the setting. Like you can play, like I said, the Space Bearers or Dragonkin or whatever. Like, there's all these amazing, cool, big, weird, small, strange creatures that you can introduce in here, and it doesn't break the rules. It doesn't really unbalance the game, and that is a testament to the underlying mechanic behind Starfinder. So regular viewers of the channel may know that I've given Pathfinder a try a couple of times, but I recently gave an update on the channel about why I just don't think Pathfinder is a right game for me. And for the nutshell version of that was because I found that Pathfinder was just too many rules. Like there was a rule for everything, which I felt intruded on play too much. I wanted to. Regular viewers know that I'm, I run a lot of OSR games on the channel, and I love that style of play. I love that rulings over rules kind of play. So you may think it's unusual that someone like me or a DM like me would gravitate towards a game like this with so much bloat or perceived bloat or whatever. But the clever thing about this game, I think, is that the complexity lies, for one, a lot of the complexity in terms of options and stuff like that is all on the player side. Players get lots of cool options for picking their themes, their races, their classes, the options in the classes, their feats, their skill points, all that kind of shit. Their gear, all that stuff is cool things they get to mull over as they make their character, For me, I don't have to worry about that stuff. I just have to worry about coming up with really fun and cool adventures for them, cool adversaries for them to face, and a great story to structure, that all those adventures in. And the setting and the way that you construct adversaries and the level-based gear makes all of that very, very easy for me as a DM. I can create encounters, so it's not just me making up stuff in a sense of there's no numbers. I'm just waiting till a dramatic moment for them to do stuff. I can put hard numbers to things and play an actual game, because that is important to me. That if players roll damage, it needs to have consequence. It doesn't need to be me just arbitrarily deciding when a monster goes down. This game lets me do that. I can run an actual game, but do it in the loosey-goosey kind of way that I want. It also means that I can spend 20 minutes hammering out a real cool NPC or adversary for them to fight, or I can come up with stuff on the fly. Like if I need to come up with a cool, a skill check or skill test that's going to be going on at the same time a fight's going on. One of my favorite encounters so far in our campaign was this one where two of the players were trying to hack this drone to get a computer program in there, while a bunch of other people were holding off these giant lava monsters, these things called thermotrods that were included in one of the Against the Aeon Throne things. I'll just show you the thermotrod because I think they're pretty fucking cool. And the thing that I liked about that was that everyone, it didn't feel boring. It felt, look at that, there's a thermotrod. That thing came out of a sea of lava to try and take these guys down, hungry for their flesh. And that was awesome. We had this crazy scene where one guy was driving a space truck kind of hover thing to try and keep them distracted, and other people were shooting at them or using spells to keep them off. And then these other guys were doing this skill, they had to stay stationary and get this thing done. And it allowed us to model the game. There were game mechanics surrounding all of that stuff, and it was very easy to come up with. And it made for a really exciting and memorable encounter. And that's this game writ large. It is so easy to run and has such a sprawling universe and setting full of amazing opportunities or things you can draw on. You don't need to, just like anyone, I'm sure, who, like, as a kid loves paging through the monster books more than anything else. I love the Alien Archives. I love the Alien Archive too. I love all those critters that are in there and all the new ones that we get in the new books. But I also love that I can grab anything else on the shelf here and relatively easily model it in my in my Starfinder game. I can grab something from Shadowrun and find a cognate or introduce some idea like that in the in the Starfinder context. And I mentioned before too about how much I really enjoyed seeing the Starfinder versions of of old school or things that you recognize from D&D. I've mentioned on the channel before, one of my favorite old books is the Monster Manual 2 for AD&D. I love this book. I've adored it since I was a kid, and I read the bejesus out of my copy. But one of the things that's in here, there's two critters, and I want to show these things here. So here is, introducing here, a thing called a tenebrous worm. Okay? Tenebrous worm is the larvae form of a creature called the Gloomwing. And the Gloomwing looks like this. Initially, this is the original version of the Gloomwing. Well, imagine my delight when I open up my copy of the first adventure in Signal of Screams, and I page through and find a Starfinder version of the Tenebrous Worm and a Starfinder version of the Gloomwing. And for me, that encapsulates, I think, one of the reasons why I just adore running this game. And why I love the products for it. I love the setting for it. And this is a hardly unbiased, review, I guess. But I mean, what review isn't unbiased? I love that stuff because what this game is a very specific vision. It's a combination of all the things that are inspirations, but then it becomes its own thing. And seeing those those Starfinder versions of some creatures from my favorite monster book from when I was a kid, I actually went and grabbed my son and I showed him the two things. I'm like, look how cool this is. This is just so awesome. And he very, politely humored his dad and was like, okay, that's neat. But it's cool that, that this is, you can see that legacy of, of D&D following through into this really trippy and inventive setting, but it is uniquely its own thing. And I'm not going to spoil anything out of here, but there's a specific way that those things manifest in the Starfinder setting, and it's awesome. And that's, to me, getting into the last sort of area of who is this for. If you were an old school player, you may feel, if you're someone who plays Pathfinder, and you kind of want to play a sci-fi version of the same types of adventures you play in the Adventure Paths or in the Pathfinder Society. I'm not even going to talk about Starfinder Society, but that's also another whole thing that you can play in your friendly local gaming store and whatnot. But if you are a Pathfinder player and you like that setting or system and whatnot, you're going to know most of what's in here. The new elements of it may, before Pathfinder 2nd edition came out, they may seem unfamiliar. Now, if you've played the playtest or if you're following the developments for that, it will feel very familiar. It definitely has its own things. I would, if you're coming from a fantasy role-playing like position and you want to come in here, definitely see this for its own thing. Don't expect that your spellcasters, if that's your jam, don't expect that they're going to be the same capability. Instead, look and see what they can do that those other guys can't. One of the things this is a bit of a non sequitur here, but one of the things that I've experienced in the course of my career is, something called a reverse honeymoon. Sometimes when you change jobs, you go to a new job, and then all you can do is think of the shitty things about this new job and think of the good things you had at the old job. But then over time, what you realize is, oh yeah, but there were shitty things about that old job that made me leave, and there's good things at this new job that I didn't have before. And I kind of went through that sort of reverse honeymoon myself when I first got into Starfinder. But now that I've acclimatized to it, I love this game. I love running this game. I love prepping for this game. I love thinking of ideas for this game. It is just a shit ton of fun. Now, as with everything, there are certain elements of it that will obviously, they may not be to taste, for things. The way the gear system works in this is very gamey. I've seen someone else online, Complex Game Apologist, describe this as like one of his initial thoughts was that the best way to think of running this is like Borderlands, where it's a loot shooter and you kind of go out and whatnot. And I don't think I like, having run it for a little while now, I don't think I agree with him, because Borderlands and loot shooters like that, you focus on the gear, and that's not what you need to do in this. One of the things that is really awesome about this game is because of the parity, because of the fact that a lot of difficulties and adversaries and whatnot, their raw numbers are all sort of paired to your level. And because you can do things like multi-attack, at first level, you feel like badass heroes right out of the gate. You feel like badasses. You feel like space heroes. I mentioned that we've only gained 2 levels, Old school players will definitely, know the joy of playing those low level, the joy that can come from low level play. But this doesn't make you feel like, oh, fuck, I hope I live. Oh, I hope I live. Like, you feel like you're immersed in a great science fiction, science fantasy story right from the get-go. You can run these fun, dramatic things. It's just a matter of you have more abilities. As you go up in levels, your numbers get a little bigger, so do the adversaries, and the things you can do get wider. Your numbers still do go up in this game, but you expand out in your class capabilities as well too. Spellcasters, your spell list gets bigger as well, but it's not as expansive as what it is in other games. So I find that's a little more manageable, even at high levels. I imagine it's going to be fairly manageable, but it does a great job of, because of that stamina mechanic too. You don't feel like, like you're a strong breeze away from dying. You really do feel like you can have fun and exciting combat right from the get-go, which is great because you can always role play. You can always explore at any level, because there's, the rules mechanics generally don't, enter into those things, except for when the tactical component gets in there. And this game, you can enjoy that tactical component right from the get-go. And that's great. And that's one of the many reasons why I find this to be just an incredibly enjoyable game. So that's people who are coming from more of a fantasy thing. The last people I want to talk to is people coming from an old school perspective. And I've mentioned this on my podcast a couple of times before, where I really feel like this game at its core, because of the ease of preparation on the DM side, because of the ease of play, I think that there's a lot of OSR type sensibilities in here. I saw the same thing in D&D 4th, and maybe this is just me having a specific perspective. But from a DM's perspective, for someone who wants to, who's got limited time, or is, running a bunch of games, or likes following where inspiration takes them in sessions, this game is incredibly friendly in that sense. It is very easy to just let the game go where you want. And if you do need to come up with stuff on the fly, you just got to crack open the Alien Archive and find what the stats you need, or you find the stats of some cool monster that's in there. In Pact Worlds, they give you a bunch of great, just like default NPC stats. And because the game is so easy to reskin, because adversaries are relatively simple to, stat-wise, it's very easy to reskin any of the stuff to be, something else. And of course, if you're really limited with time, there are the adventure paths. Now, the one criticism I would have of the adventure paths is the same criticism I have of the other adventure paths with that Paizo puts out, which is to say you don't have all the stats in here. You've got to, there's times where there are encounters where you've got to they reference the Alien Archive or Alien Archive 2, and you got to go and look up the fucking thing. And that's fine. That is a publishing decision that they've made way back when. They do that in the Pathfinder Adventures 2. And because you can find all those stats at their system reference document, then you can get it for free. So you don't need to buy the book. But for someone playing it at the table, who often is playing, I want to play straight from the module, what a pain in the butt. And I guess, conversely, someone who's a more prepared DM might just say, well, Kev, look the stuff up beforehand, dummy, and have it sitting there. So I guess, because that's what you have to do. But it's just for myself, for my own taste, I really wish that that was in there, because I love that old school modules did that. But, but whatever, it is a very, very minor criticism. Another thing I guess I would say is I wished that they released the maps for this one. Like I'm part of the subscription thing, so I get like a PDF copy of this and a physical copy sent from Paizo, and I wish that they had. I can pull out digital versions of the maps from the PDFs, but I wish that they had separate map packs the way they do with the Pathfinder ones, because that would be awesome, and especially for folks who are playing on digital in digital format like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds. That would be really helpful, especially things that don't have the fucking secret passages or the numbers on the ground. I could do without another player telling me, hey, I'm in room 5, because I can't get a version that doesn't have the numbers on it. But those are extremely minor criticisms, and it's very, very, the fortunate thing is I can just flip to the book and I've got all my stats there. So that is I don't know how long that's been. It looks like it's been about an hour and a half, probably, maybe longer. So that is a really, really sprawling overview of what's out for Starfinder, and what my experience has been with it so far, and what I think that who this might appeal to. The one thing, again, what this game is not is I wouldn't use this to run a sci-fi, like a generic sci-fi setting. I would use Traveler. I would use GURPS. I would use Star Hero, or I'd use a thing like was it Revised Stars Without Number, something that is keyed towards running just a sci-fi thing. That's not what this game is. What this game is, in the same way that D&D is more. It incorporates elements of all the source material, but it's more than that. I don't want to say bigger, because but it is, like D&D is its own thing, and it's really occupies its own creative space. It has its own sensibilities, and that's the way to understand Starfinder. You will find, if you love any of those things that are part of that, if you love Blade Runner, if you love, The Expanse, if you love Star Trek, Star Wars, Babylon 5, any of those things, you will find things to latch onto in this game that you will love. Whether that means that there's everything that you would love, whether all that together fits for you is another question. But I'll close on this thing. Actually, I'm going to check chat as well, too. It looks like we've got some people active in chat. So I'll check and see if anyone has any things that I should address that I forgot about. But I've been a longtime fan of Shadowrun. I played Shadowrun from the first time the first book came out. We were big Battletech nerds at the time. So when FASA published the first Shadowrun book, we got into it and we started playing right away. And Shadowrun is, for those who are unfamiliar, is basically like a cyberpunk setting where magic has returned. So there's elves and dwarves and whatever else, but it's humans who have mutated. It is very grounded fantasy, which is kind of a weird concept, but it's like Tolkien-esque fantasy ground down into the cyberpunk setting. I love the books. I've been a fanatic for Shadowrun for 20, 30 years, or however long it's been out. But the thing that I've always found is that sometimes the setting feels kind of silly because it's set on Earth. There's times where I just like, it feels a bit much the way they push metahuman racism or some of the other things where it just feels silly sometimes. It's usually like one every 4 days or one every 3 days. It depends. I have never felt that with Starfinder because they did the thing where, and they're different animals, obviously. They're not apples to apples here. But the reason I never feel that with Starfinder is because it is its own thing. It created its own setting. I'm not, this isn't the far future. It is its own setting. And it cleverly, you don't have to, it escaped the potential morass of an overly described backstory for a setting by introducing that thing called the Gap, because no one remembers anything about history from more than 300 years ago. So that's very, very another really clever setup thing for it. So that is Starfinder. I hope that has helped you figure out whether you think this is something that you might want to check out. I mean, there's tons of free ways to check this out. The online resource. What is it? The system reference stuff. There's a Skittershot, the free module to play. You can play free in any friendly local gaming store. We'll probably have a Starfinder Society night. And you can see on my channel our campaign playing against the Aeon Throne adventure path. I'm playing with 4, sometimes 5. We've had people jump in, drop out of the campaign, but 4 or 5 really, really awesome players who know the system and are playing great and fun characters. You can see what damage we've done to the universe in that campaign. Now, let's see here. What do we got in chat? Arlen, I'm not going to compare too much to Stars Without Number, only because this is about... someone in chat asked if I could compare this to Revised Stars Without Number. And Revised Stars Without Number, just in a very, very nutshell version, is a sandbox game published by Cine Nominee Publishing. It's written by Kevin Crawford. It's an OSR game that is a great toolkit sci-fi thing. You can choose to run a hard sci-fi game with it. You can run a game with psionics in it. You can run a game with a very specific kind of magic. It's got some really great supplements for running military, for running diplomatic, commercial things. And they've also got a neat set of sub rules in that game that you could play in heroic mode. So you can play in kind of like the Star Wars, blasting through, reams of enemies if you want, or you can play it in a really more grounded, dangerous, lethal kind of mode as well too. The main difference I would say is that Starfinder is its own thing. It has its own sensibilities. It has its own elements. It has its own specific mechanics. Whereas Revised Stars Without Number is a toolkit. You build the game. There is a default setting in there, but you could use it to run almost anything else. If you are making a decision between the two, I would probably make the decision whether do you want to run your own setting or do you want to play in Starfinder? Do you want to play in the Starfinder setting? If you want to play in the Starfinder setting, just play Starfinder. If you want to create your own thing, and your own setting and explore it in the kind of sandboxy way that you are encouraged to do in Revised Stars Without Number, then Stars Without Number is your right thing. If you don't want to have a specific type of magic and D&D monsters and whatever else, really, if you don't want to play in the Pact World setting, maybe, Revised Stars Without Number is an easier game to make fit what you want to have in your sci-fi game. Whereas Starfinder, you play Starfinder to play Starfinder. So that's maybe a way of comparing the two. Anything similar to Spelljammer? Walter, it's a good question. So Spelljammer is an old D&D setting that was kind of like Swords and Planet in D&D. It was trying to capture that kind of Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter, or I can't remember the name of the guy who went to Venus. So there's the Venusian Chronicles or the Barsoom Chronicles, where it's basically kind of like those had like a medieval setting, but like in a exotic, space setting. It's Flash Gordon to a degree. This has very different sensibilities. This is more of a modern sci-fi sensibility than what Spelljammer was. Spelljammer was D&D in space, where you're still playing fighters and elves and dwarves and wizards and whatnot. Any spells, the tech level was exactly the same. Apart from space travel, tech level was pretty much the same. There were some races that had firearms in Spelljammer, like the GIF, those space hippo men that could be hired out as mercenaries. But, and I guess there's also the space gnomes with their giant space hamsters and their spaceships. So apart from that, it's pretty much just the same D&D level technology. This is completely its own thing. It is distinctly a sci-fi, Star Wars era kind of thing. Or Star Wars, or like Firefly with a little bit more tech. Its individual ships, can move around and they can have drift drives and stuff like that. But the bigger the ship, the more powerful it is. Kind of follows Star Wars rules, I think. The bigger the ship, the heavier firepower, but it doesn't mean you're automatically going to annihilate a smaller ship, So it is definitely different than that. And the space travel is technological in this, not magical. Magic will allow you to shift between planes, but it will not allow you to go to the plane that is the drift. You can't get to or out of the drift with magic. You need to use technology. So that's one pretty substantial difference between Spelljammer and this. You could you could pretty easily introduce that stuff if you wanted, like if you like something about it, but some of the setting conceits in Spelljammer, like the crystal spheres and stuff like that, and the phlogiston between that's completely different than the way that the cosmology of Starfinder is set up. So you'd have to come up with an explanation of that being some kind of pocket dimension, but you could do that. I mean, you could just set up the phlogiston as being its own kind of space. You could easily, if you like some of the elements from that, you could do that. But what you could also do, which might be actually, more in keeping with Starfinder, in the same vein as those like Tenebris Swarms and whatnot, take what you love about, Spelljammer, and then figure out how that fits. What's it gonna look like in a Starfinder lens? I'm already thinking about GIF. GIF would be pretty fucking cool, and maybe I need to introduce some GIF into my Starfinder game. Yeah, no, and Fred, no problem. Happy to, Raphael. Yeah, so alternating in the Star Drive setting, it kind of is. I think I'm honestly don't know enough about the Star Drive setting, but like I said, like Starfinder draws on so many different sensibilities and so many different sources that it's you can find room for it, or you can find something close to that setting in pretty much anything else you'd love. I don't know if you were familiar with the old Spelljammer setting, but like the Hadozi, the deck apes that were introduced from that. My understanding is that they actually came from Star Frontiers. So there's a source book came out for Spelljammer that basically took characters from that and then dropped them into the Spelljammer setting. From Star Frontiers, which is a completely different game. And then this has character races that are similar to those too. So, and then it also has its own things like those contemplatives that I showed, the floating brain guys. So it's, you can definitely, like, there's kind of like Jedi in here. There's kind of like a Starfleet. So you can find elements from other gaming settings. This is, obviously not a created in a void. But the thing I really love about the game is that means that there's a lot of familiar stuff there too, yeah. So, excellent. Okay, so I think that's it. Great trip. I already like the game. I like it even better now. Awesome, Fred. I'm really glad. And yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to sing the praises of games that I really love. I hope that I've given the potential shortcomings for the game, or the things that you might stumble against in the game as well too. Particularly the gear system. It is a level-based game, so there's that. But I find because of the paired or the parity with level kind of stuff, the level system doesn't feel as I'm not waiting for my guys to be heroes. They're heroes right from the get-go, which I love. I can't believe we've played this long for, we played 10 sessions. We spent 30 hours in Starfinder and the guys have only gained 1 level. That's great. So anyway, that is kind of my overview of Starfinder. If I haven't addressed anything that you have further questions about, if you're curious about something that I did talk about that you'd like to learn more, please don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section below, and I will endeavor to reply in a timely fashion. Alternatively, you can find me on Twitter at Dungeon Musings, or you can shoot me an email at dungeonmusings@gmail.com. You can also find us every second Sunday playing Starfinder on the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. So if you want to follow us along as our heroes take up arms against the Aeon Throne, we're on module Uno still, but our players are about to, at the time of recording, storm the garrison. So things are about to get exciting. And then also there are, we're in a fortunate time where there is a preponderance of actual play, other sessions that are out there. The guys there's a woman who plays in the campaign as well, but the guys behind the Glass Cannon podcast, they have a really fun actual play series called Androids and Aliens, where they're playing through Dead Suns, the first adventure path. Oops, is that the first one? Yeah, it's the first one. And it's I've listened to quite a few of them, and they're really, really good. There's also a podcast called Cosmic Crit, I believe, and that one also has a bunch of actual play on it. Those are just audio, so you can do that. Plus, there's a bunch of people playing it online as well too. So you do a search, you can find other people playing if you want to see whether it's fits to your sensibility. But in particular, for those of you in the who are more towards an old school scene, I would even if Pathfinder would never be for your liking, I would I give it a look, because there's a lot of the reasons I love this game are a lot of the same reasons I love old school stuff too. So that's that. Until next time. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for the folks in chat who have joined us and helped me address some of the other questions that I should have addressed as I was going through this. Yeah, and I think that's probably it. Last thing I'll say is that you may notice in the description of this video is a link to something called Heroes Save Villages. This is the charity fundraising campaign that we run on the channel. We don't monetize the channel. We don't run ads, so we don't run a Patreon. Any money that comes through, not through or in the direction of the channel, we'd prefer it to go through to that, which benefits the SOS Children's Villages International charity. From now at the time of recording up until July 1st, 2019, we are running a charity raffle. And for every $25 that's donated to the charity, you get entered once into the raffle. And the raffle has as its grand prize a platinum edition of the Waterdeep Dragon Heist box set. That's the Beetle and Grimm product that came out. It's this massive box that has all the stuff you would ever need with these amazing handouts and maps and stuff to play through the Dragon Heist box set for 5th edition. At the time of release, it was a $500 US product. It's brand new. And it is the grand prize for this. But in addition to that, we also have a bunch of other prizes. If you don't win the grand prize, those include core rulebooks for Chaosium's RuneQuest Glorantha, Fantasy Flight Games' Legend of the Five Rings, the Delta 2 books for the Delta Green role-playing game published by Arcdream Publishing, the core rulebook from the new Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, published by Cubicle 7. And very generously, the good folks at Paizo have donated a copy of the beginner box as well, too. So if you want to have a chance to really take a dive, take up your space gun, your lasers, and take on a scrap dragon, that is one of the many prizes that are available. We also have a bunch of other prizes that you can find described on the video that I shot in relation to that. But we've also had publishers donate things like Modifius has a full PDF library of the Star Trek Adventures books and the Conan 2D20 books. So there's lots of very cool prizes available. And any money that's donated goes towards helping SOS Children's Villages International benefit the children that their charity benefits. You can learn all about that at the link below. And that's that. So anyway, I should go and do something else. So I will wrap up my overview here. As I said, I really hope this has helped make up your mind as to whether this is the game you might want to pick up, or if you have picked it up and haven't got it to the table yet, whether you want to get it to the table. Please don't hesitate to ask me, or really, anybody else in the community who may be playing or running Starfinder. There's tons of great players out there. It's a really terrific community. But until next time, thank you again for watching, and happy gaming.